If we dedicate war memorials to the memory of men and women cut down before their time, these are war memorials, as surely as any crosses on any lost and lonely battlefield in any long-ago war.
That stack there, it's sort of scenic, but really that's historic for the people it's killed. You can imagine a disease that is magnified 13,000% above what is normal for Ontario workers.
No poppies grow between these memorials. No poems urge us to mourn and remember the dead. But the dead and all who love them remember. They remember how they were lied to and brushed aside, even as the peril they were in consumed them. They remember how going into work day after day becomes too much like war, a place where too many die before their time.
Unions themselves don't like to tell their workers that the diseases may be rampant in the plant. Well, we don't want to tell them too much about that because it'll cause a panic. Should we tell them? Cause a panic? I guess we should tell them. Cause a panic? Them people are going to die.
Jerry Mills is one of the dead. The workplace took him when he was just 51.
He didn't want to die. He wanted to live. He wanted to see his little boy raised. He wanted to see all his children. It was an awful shock, particularly cancer, carcinoma of the colon. There was no cancer anywhere in Jerry's family, ever. Still to this day, there isn't.
Jerry tried to stay out of harm's way, but death tracked him down just the same.
Jerry did not want to work in the mines. He felt it was dangerous. He thought he was safe on the surface. And it's everything that you find out about later. And I always remember his work clothes was full of black dust. I had to take them to the laundromat, through the special washers. Originally, when he started in the warehouse, from what I understand, they used to scoop asbestos up with like a flour scoop into paper bags. And there was even a particular incident when he said the guys were getting concerned and they were all going to tell the boss they were going to go home because of these PCBs that were leaking. The boss kind of called them a bunch of babies and went over and put his finger in it and I licked it to show him it wasn't dangerous. I often wonder whatever happened to him.
Dying is hard. Dying before your time is harder still. Knowing you're going to die and that you have to say goodbye is the hardest and cruelest death of all.
When my husband Jerry and his son Gary had to say goodbye to each other, both knowing they'd never see each other again. Gary knowing that when he came home again it would be for his dad's funeral. Like, no matter what we all went through, I think that had to be the toughest, really.
Cancer in the workplace is an incredibly important issue, and the reason being that there are so many workers who are unnecessarily dying from preventable causes of cancer because of their exposures on the job.
Dr. Peter Infante heads the American Health Standards Branch for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's his job to protect workers like Jerry Mills by setting the standards for acceptable levels of chemicals in the workplace.
The majority of substances that are known to cause cancer in people have been identified by studying blue-collar workers. And you say, well, why is that the case? It's the case because the exposures are so high.
There's not very much difference between me lifting up a gun and pointing it at you and then shooting you, and me exposing you to chemicals where you work, knowing fully well that you may get cancer from them, and not telling you about it, and if you ask questions about it, say, don't worry about it at all.
Dr. Samuel Epstein is one of the world's leading experts on environmental causes of cancer, as well as professor of occupational and environmental medicine at the University of Illinois.
If there's a carcinogen in the workplace, ban it, replace it with a safe alternative, or use it in such a way there can be no exposure. There's no such thing as safe levels of exposure to carcinogens. Having said that, workers have got to realize that they are not isolated. They're part of a community. They're part of a nation. What happens to the worker in the workplace affects his children. It affects the community around him. It affects the taxpayer.
As tragic as it is, it comes as no real surprise that work in heavy industry claims workers' lives. But what is there to fear from an office? In this case, just a quiet space filled with computers. Dozens and dozens of computers, but nothing to hurt you. Computers aren't punch presses, blast furnaces, or jackhammers after all. But computers do create electromagnetic fields. Put enough of these computers together in a sealed environment, like an office, and you can create a serious health risk.
I had many computers on my desk, and a fax machine, and a printer sitting here, and the person sitting across from me, the back of their terminal was, the back was facing me, so now I was exposed to the back of them, and my terminal, and all the other terminals around me.
Trish Ballin, Lorna Wilson, and Maureen Steeves were all happy to be working for Bell Canada in Hamilton. But soon, the women couldn't ignore the evidence in their own bodies.
I was diagnosed in November of 1994. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I feel that my disease was caused from the workplace. 6 months after I was diagnosed, my best friend Maureen was diagnosed with the same disease. After Maureen, there was another girl diagnosed about 6 months after her with breast cancer as well, Lorna.
Within the next 18 months, there was 9 of us with cancer. About 20 people out of 65 had tumors of some kind. There were 5 of us with breast cancer, 2 with colon cancer, 3 with brain tumors. 1 of them was cancer. There's a number of thyroid tumors.
In 1995, I had a reoccurrence, and I ended up going in the hospital for a bone marrow transplant last December. I mean, our lives have changed drastically. I mean, kids had to see me with no hair, and you know, it's been really tough. My best friend Maureen passed away 2 weeks ago. She lost her battle. I mean, it's pretty tough to watch your best friend die and have to help her do that.
Maureen Steeves worked alongside Lorna and Trish. Maureen is now among the dead. She was cut down at age 39. She left behind her husband Phil, 3 young boys, and a 4-year-old daughter.
Today was her birthday, so we went out to the cemetery and put some flowers out there for her, didn't we, guys? It's kind of weird going to say happy birthday to somebody at their gravesite. You know, I'm kind of angry that nobody's from Bell Canada's even called us and said, you know, we're sorry about Maureen, or we're sorry about this or that, or Maureen worked 10 years there. That was her career. She planned to work there for the next 20 or 30 years, however many years, until she retired with her pension. I mean, that was the deal. They provide a safe working environment, and she works there.
For Lorna, the effects of her cancer soon became all too obvious. So did 2 other things. 1, there were way too many cancers among this group of young, once healthy women. 2, the women with the cancers all worked in the same building, on the same floor. When her employer refused to admit the connection, Lorna made it her job to prove it.
I went to the Brantford Library. I read every book the Brantford Library had on electromagnetic fields. I wrote down every expert, what his opinion on the topic was, every health effect they thought was associated with EMFs. I started a card index on every employee who had been diagnosed with cancer, when they started with the company, when they were diagnosed, what they were diagnosed with.
Lorna's evidence piled up. The employer was unmoved, saying the women were just unlucky, victims of a cancer cluster, a random tragedy that life sometimes deals out. The company even brought in a hired gun to explain it all to Lorna and her workmates.
The question was asked, is there any health effects that are related to EMFs? And he stood up and emphatically told those employees no. So I stood up and told these employees that even though I wasn't an expert in EMFs, that I had done my homework, and I read out a list of all the possible effects that EMFs have been linked to.
What we have here is 6 women exposed to mainframe and VDT, mainframe workers and VDT. 6 women out of a group of about 12 cancers, of the total of 12 cancers, 6 women had breast cancer. Now, 5 of these women had developed breast cancer between the ages of 30 and 40, premenopausal breast cancer. Now, any idea as to the frequency of breast cancer in women aged 30? 1 in 600. The mathematics of this are overwhelming. 5 women out of a small group exposed to EMF, which has clearly been incriminated as a cause of occupational cancer, for which we have studies on breast cancer. 5 women of the premenopausal age have breast cancer. Now, what else do you want?
I believe that workers have to stay true to their own experience. If they believe that there's a problem in their workplace, if they see people around them with these diseases, cancer, and they believe that they may be coming from their exposures in the workplace, then they must act on that experience. We will never have all the scientific information that will prove conclusively that this or that substance or exposure caused this disease. And by the time we were to get all that information, many, many more people would be exposed, many, many more people would be at risk, and unfortunately, many, many more people would have this disease.
Going into work shouldn't be a death-defying act, but that's what it becomes when so little consideration is given to providing workers with a chance to protect themselves, not just from the health threats they know about, but from the ones they don't. George Cook is a firefighter in Hamilton. One night he answered what he thought was a routine call. Within minutes he was fighting one of the most lethal fires of his career.
You felt actually kind of helpless because the fire was so large. The largest fire I've ever been at, by far. I've been on the job almost 28 years, and I've been to some big fires, and this is by far the biggest.
George is very sick, but he doesn't know, and nobody will tell him, if he's recovering from the toxic effects of fighting a fire in early 1997, or if he is sinking into incurable sickness.
I swallowed some of the water and went in my ears and in my eyes and up my nose.
An already dangerous fire became life-threatening for George when he tripped on a hose and landed face first in a large pool of water. This was the runoff from the water that had been sprayed on the fire.
I found out the next day that water contained large amounts of heavy metals, lead, zinc, cadmium, magnesium, and here I am, drinking this stuff, basically, Since then I've had problems breathing, tightness of the chest, tiredness. I tire quite easily now, whereas before I never had any problems.
Henry Watson, the president of Local 288 of the Hamilton Firefighters Association, is fighting for George and other firefighters who are suffering the effects of the fire.
Still have firefighters that are working that have periodic episodes of headaches. Even when they had no history of headaches in the past, they are suffering severe headaches, almost a migraine type of headache, upper respiratory tract difficulties.
Being a firefighter probably, reduces your lifespan by about 10 years. I don't know. I just hope that this has not reduced by a lot more than that, my lifespan by a lot more than that.
Workers are really the canaries in the coal mine, and the cancers that we're seeing in workers have a very strong message for the general population.
Dr. Sandra Steingraber is a noted biologist and expert on the environmental causes of cancer. She believes chemicals in the workplace affect us all.
The cancer-causing chemicals in the workplace are the very same chemicals the rest of us are being exposed to, perhaps in lower dosages throughout different points in our development. But these chemicals don't stop at the factory door or when the office is closed at night. They often seep from the workplace into the general environment, sometimes by chemical accident, sometimes by routine toxic emissions, such as letting them out into the air through smokestacks, depositing them into rivers and streams. And so the general population has the same exposures that workers do in higher concentrations. That's why we must pay particular attention to what kind of cancers we're seeing in workers and at what levels.
Fighting fires is a high-risk occupation, but the risk is carefully calculated. Firefighters like Mark Staley and his father stake their lives on this. But all the calculations in the world couldn't save Mark's father when he had to fight a fire raging in a building full of unknown chemicals.
I believe that, yes, that especially the Horticultural Technologies fire was a definite contributor, and probably the catalyst or the start of my dad's cancer was probably at that point.
The shadow cast by his father's untimely death has lengthened to touch Mark and his family. First, Mark had a stroke. Then he was rocked by a near-fatal concentration of toxins in his liver. The whole family now lives in fear of losing a husband and father.
It's just a very scary feeling that you might lose your husband or your father. And to me, that's the fear that we live in. I just wish that the government agencies and other people that are in a position to actually take these things seriously, that there's more going on here with cancer-related incidents in firefighters. It's not just something that happens in an odd case. It's happening all the time, and it just seems to be happening more frequently. I guess that's why we try to spend as much time together as the family when Mark isn't working, because you just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring.
Big oil dominates the landscape in Sarnia the way it dominates everything it touches. No business is bigger, no enterprise more successful. But there's another side to it. Joel Carr is a national representative for the Communications, Energy and Paperworkers Union of Canada.
Take a picture of a refinery when you drive by. You see large towers, you see interconnecting pipes. All those pipes and all those towers are insulated, and people had to put that insulation on. And other workers had to do other work right next to the insulators as they were in fact putting that insulation on. And when you put insulation on, and when you take the old insulation off, you create airborne asbestos. And we now know that that causes mesothelioma, lung cancers, and a series of other cancers. And those cancers are now appearing at record rates in Lambton County and the Sarnia area. In fact, it's the capital of mesothelioma in all of Canada.
John Bichard didn't know any of this when he started work here back in the late 60s. John was the perfect company man. Above all, John trusted his employer.
He's the company man. I'm the angry wife of that man who was dying. I imagined that John and I would grow old together, that we would, when we were in our 80s, we would still be dancing. We love one another very much. We're one another's best friends, and I thought that the rest of my life would be spent with him.
John's work put him in regular contact with asbestos and over 200 chemicals. He couldn't bring himself to believe the company would knowingly expose him to chemicals that would damage his health.
Oh yes, I think the company were aware that there were dangers, but they obviously didn't police it close enough, and they did not communicate. They do not believe, this is a formal position given by the Director of Occupational Health, we do not believe that colon rectal cancer is caused by asbestos. Yet the WCB, they recognize it. It is clearly stated.
Now, it's very unusual in medical circles to have two different primary cancers. That's kind of a rare entity. But the real kicker was that his lungs were also full of asbestos. John worked for one company and one company only. He did not contract asbestos in this home nor anywhere else. If it happened where he was working.
One of the most shocking things for me when we set up a satellite clinic in Sarnia was to see how quickly our whole facility was dealing almost exclusively with cancer, and how few physicians had talked to these people about the potential for their workplace being the cause of their illness.
The plant gate doesn't stop airborne pollutants. It got into the community, and it was taken home by workers in their clothes, to their families, to the children, and it got into the neighborhoods just across those fences that don't stop anything. And you know, it's unbelievable that these companies knowingly allowed people to do that, because you know why? It was cheap.
There are two certainties in this war, as there are in all wars: despair and hope. Despair over the casual decision some people take to kill workers. Hope sparked by the actions of those we call heroes, the men and women who fight to protect us from those who are so careless with workers' lives. Bud Jimmerfield is one of those heroes.
Brother White, how are we?
As a young man, Bud didn't expect to fight for his life when he started work. No one told him that the chemicals he was working with could damage his health. Today, he has cancer of the liver and the esophagus, and he's fighting for his life. He's the father of 8 children.
I worked on a tooling machine, a large drill, and you would drill a bunch of holes, maybe 200 holes in a plate. And you'd have to tap these holes after. So it had coolant in it. You'd just take an air hose and blow it off, and you could have it on your palate, absorb through your skin, or ingest it because of the vaporization.
If you're talking about people who are developing cancers as a result of exposure to metalworking fluids, that's not going to happen for 20, maybe 30 years. So people didn't, for many, many years, make the connection between the exposure at work and the cancer showing up many years later.
Kathy Walker is head of health and safety for the Canadian Auto Workers.
I think there's still profound ignorance on the part of many employers in smaller workplaces. I think a lot of people in machine shops running small tool and die shops and such are still pretty unaware, because you go into all sorts of workplaces and really there's no controls at all.
Bud did his job. Neither the company nor government representatives warned him of the dangers, but as he looks back on it now, he feels they all knew.
For sure they know. They got to know. I mean, with all of the studies, I mean, we're just doing now this cancer study on cancer of the esophagus. We submitted WCB. Well, that goes somewhere. Where do they just open it, look in a book, say here's a bunch of quacks and throw it away? It's an accurate survey. But the government has to be pushed to do something with this. We can't just keep doing surveys and surveys and surveys saying we got a problem.
Bud's been a union man all his working life. Now that he's too sick to work, he still comes to the union hall every day.
I think someday I won't be able to come here. Physically.
That's going to be tough.
Oh yeah. That's my whole life gone. As I see it. You know? The contact with people, you know, that you have here, and knowing that you made a difference.
Victims of workplace diseases are never alone. In every illness and death, the whole family becomes a casualty.
Traumatically and emotionally, what my family's going through, I really couldn't tell you. Because I know it's a lot, eh? I can see it on their face, you know. When they get up in the morning, all of them like to rub the old bald apple, eh? Give me a head rub. Hey, how you doing this morning, Dad? Can we say a prayer for you? They're giving me medals, you know. All kinds of medals. There's a medal, this medal, a medal with a picture of some nun who's a healer on it. So they're giving me all this stuff. Here, wear this for me. This is going to help you. But 3 weeks ago, they told me the chemotherapy wasn't working. So I have about probably 20 cells on my liver, and now they're spreading to my stomach. So medically, there's no plan B. They can't isolate my liver enough to do anything because the cells will just keep going. Thinking about the kids growing up, grandchildren someday, I don't know if I'll ever see that. Say a prayer for me, thanks. That's all that's helping now. That's it.
The war that all workers are caught up in is the oldest battle on earth. It's the fight for simple survival, the fight for life over death. If there has to be a war, let it be a war waged by workers rather than against them, a war that gives life rather than takes it. Let it be a war that we fight to make sure work is never, ever the reason anyone has to die before their time.
We got enough knowledge now. If you're exposed to toxins or carcinogens in the workplace, damn it to hell. If the company and the government won't look after us, and their history is that they don't, we got to do it ourselves. And if it requires going to the bargaining table and having the right to close every workplace that has exposures, have workers having the right to refuse to go in a workplace that's got toxins or carcinogens or chemicals that are harmful to us, we got to prevent those exposures inch by inch to save lives. This isn't about being nice. This isn't about trying to save jobs. This is about trying to save lives.
We know our workplace is better than anyone else. We have to stay close to our experience, and that's the lesson that all our history teaches us. If we don't act on what we believe and what we see, then God help us.